She's like the best cheerleader ever. You say one thing, she's like, oh my God, it's perfect. We have it. Like, we only did one take. Okay.
So first, I would love to talk to you guys a little bit about the unique challenges and experience behind telling the story of a real person versus a fictional character. Does that change how you portray it and how you write it?
I think the portrayal was really in the writing. And I think the inspiration that was based on a historic figure made it exciting and thrilling, and also knowing that the research that was done behind the scenes before I even received the script made me feel so secure, and trusting that process and working in tandem with Eloise was, I don't know, was just a really natural fit that we had together. Eloise obviously can speak more about the research and understanding it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so our lead writer, Maya Bodenstein, is incredible, and she specializes in telling culturally accurate stories. She's half Chinese and half German, and so working with her was an amazing opportunity because she really sort of paved the way to create a game that was historically accurate and culturally accurate. And so we literally started with that as our foundation, and we worked off it to work out what the game was going to be, but it was very much a narrative experience first. So we, for example, had a writer's room, which is so rare in game development. Usually for a game, you start with the mechanics and you work out what the mechanics are going to be, and then you create the narrative around that. Whereas for this, we did it the other way around. So we got in a room with myself, with Maya, with our lead artist, our lead producer, our lead programmer, our game designer, and together we created the game and the experience and what it was going to feel like. And I think in that as well, we worked out kind of the ebbs and flows of the game. We wanted it to sometimes feel really high tension, but also have elements that were more slow paced and relaxing, and having that balance rather than a traditional combat game, which is just very heavy and very intense. And it was that sort of development that really sort of led how the experience was going to be.
And it's so hard to capture the scope of a whole person's life, especially someone as prolific as this protagonist. How did you narrow down the facets of her life and her character that were most important to include in the game?
I mean, I think that the fact that they found this sliver to kind of focus on the night that of the true succession of her power, it was such a great idea. Because how do you start? I mean, I would look at this and I would be sort of overwhelmed, especially since it is a historic figure. You don't want to really mess that up. But what I kind of really see is that it's somebody who is forgotten and somebody who is really ahead of her time. So I think knowing that, the fact that, you know, they found this place of her coming into power, it's such an important moment for her. And I think that that's an exciting time for the player to get involved and to feel that rush and to explore as well. And I'm sure that it took you a long time to sort of decide where to go and how to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, it was really intimidating. It was this idea she's such a phenomenal figure. To narrow that down into one experience was a huge challenge, but it felt like a natural fit to have it as one night and to focus in. And also this idea of we wanted to create sort of the storytelling elements of the ghost of her past and looking into her backstory and how to do that in a compelling way. And especially for VR, which is very much an experience where you as a player are leading the story, you find out and you uncover certain aspects. It was really refreshing to be able to create something that was on one night, but you pick up and explore different objects that give you backstory and give you more of a sense of who she was and why she was doing these things and what this world was. So it feels like we were giving the players the agency to discover her story.
And you mentioned how you wanted it to have these sort of ebbs and flows. And I noticed that in the preview, like there's a little downtime where you light the incense and then suddenly someone's knocking at the door and you have to escape.
Yeah.
Did you always have that sort of roller coaster style narrative in mind for the game?
We did, yeah, and especially developing the beginning, because we developed the short version of the Pirate Queen first, which then went to Rain Dance and won Rain Dance, and it was that iteration process at the beginning of realizing that actually in each room we wanted to create a character arc and a narrative arc. And so in each room you literally have an element where you have the midpoint, you have the lose it all moment, and that was something that we felt worked really well because it just amplified the stakes that the player had to go through.
And what do you feel are the biggest elements that set this game apart from typical VR titles?
I mean, I really think that most games involve a lot of combat, and really how you win is basically damage.
Yeah.
You know, how many, the body count, things like that. And I think in this particular game, it's quite different because it is a narrative story. And it's also the idea that, you know, for VR, this is the first time they had to actually develop female hands. It didn't even exist until they came in and realized, oh, there's no female hands. They had to create that. They had to create her, you know, bespoke jewelry, her dirty fingernails. I mean, that says a lot. I think that for female protagonists, it's probably like 20% of the games have a female protagonist. So that's quite different. And it's, I think it really tips us in the direction of what's missing in this. And I think leadership in terms of women, it's not really thought about, you know. They don't really think that they're as interested in this search or this quest. And I think it's great that this exists so that there can be that you're really in the forefront of something new and adventurous, not unlike the, you know, what Chung Shu was doing.
Now, did you already know of this historical figure when you started the project, or was it a fresh learning experience for you too?
Very fresh learning experience, hearing about this character, hearing about the Pirate Queen altogether. I think when you hear the Pirate Queen, you just assume that it's a made-up character. And that's what's unfortunate, because you kind of really believe what you're fed. And as a child, you're like, oh, these are all the Disney characters. These are all the things. And you know, there's a limitation to what you know and what you learn. And I think that's kind of detrimental, but also wonderful, because this is there's other generations that are gonna see this and also gonna understand that this is not something that I can't be. I can do all these things as well. And I think it would have been very different if there were more female characters as, you know, the leads or as heroines when I was growing up.
And you mentioned a little bit the smaller details, like they had to make female hands for the first time and her ornate jewelry. I'm curious what other elements like that aren't necessarily huge set pieces or details, but really still felt important to you guys to include.
Yeah, there were so many. I mean, even just the way that books are bound, you know, they're bound the opposite way in China. And that was something that I didn't know at the time. So I think it was amazing to have these experiences where we learned very much about Chinese culture as well, because ultimately half of our team who were developing the game have East Asian heritage. And so it was this beautiful cross collaboration where we were learning about Chinese culture and about these nuances. I mean, for example, in China, you say Chinese characters, not Chinese symbols. And one of our programmers, Han Kun, during our lunch breaks, he would come in with inks and brushes and teach us how to write Chinese calligraphy, which was amazing. I'm terrible at it. But it was so cool, and it was such a beautiful experience. And we got really into the detail, so much so that the mats on the ship, we looked at whether they were going to be woven left to right or right to left, just to make sure that they were accurate for the game. There was a huge amount of care and love that went into creating it, because ultimately, culture is such an important part of our identity. It's the foundation of who we are, and we knew as a UK-based studio that if we were going to create a story that was based on a different culture, that we really needed to respect that and create something that reflected the time and the place.
And Lucy, in terms of the recording process, are there any scenes that stand out to you as particularly difficult or rewarding to record?
I mean, she's like the best cheerleader ever. You say one thing, she's like, oh my God, it's perfect. We have it. Like, we only did one take. Okay. I think the real value that I learned from this experience in terms of the recording is that you really don't have to shout. You know, I think the quieter your voice is, the better, and the more intimate it is for the player, because you are the players. You're kind of their voice is to be aware of that. And I liked that so much, because it made it so much more. It's kind of like, you know, when one is doing theater and you're trying to talk to somebody, but you're like talking to them like this, and you don't feel like you're being that natural. I mean, now they have a lot of microphones in theater, but you know, when I was doing theater, they didn't have microphones at all, and so it's almost the most real experience that I've had in voiceover, because I'm just talking, and it was enough, and it's kind of such a confidence booster, knowing that the more subtle it is, the better it is, and that's how I usually like to play it anyway.
And I know you've recorded a little bit in video games before this experience, but this is the biggest video game role that you've had. Do you see yourself doing more of this sort of thing in the future?
I mean, I was introduced to it, and I think that it's fascinating to me, because most of the work is done before they ask you to come on board. So you kind of feel like you didn't really do anything, but at the same time, you're part of something that's been such a collaborative experience over an extended period of time. And it's not just, 6 months or something like that. It's years. I mean, 5 to 6 years in development working on this. It's a gift, really, and a blessing to be a part of something that someone else has poured their hearts into, So for me, I value that, and I value the relationships that I make along the way.
And for both of you, do you guys have a favorite level in the game? I think I know what yours is.
Yeah, what is yours?
That's it. What do you think mine is?
I think yours is the obstacle course, right?
The sampan maze?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the sampan maze, because it's so beautiful and it's so immersive, and it's a different environment. So you're seeing a lot more of the world and who she was in charge of as well. And the fact that it's not just men, it's women and children who were living as part of this huge village, which was beautiful, literally a floating village. And there's a bit at the end, and I'm not going to give it away, but there's a bit at the end of that level that is so incredible and cinematic, and it's so perfect for VR, because something happens and suddenly you realize that, you need to up your game, basically. And
Literally.
Quite literally. All puns intended. And that is such a beautiful thing in VR, because you can't emulate that anywhere else. And it really highlights why we chose to tell this story in VR.
I think what I love is that she worked on it for so long, but she's still kind of excited about playing the game. And I think sometimes you're like, I've been cooking and I do not want to eat anything else. And I think that's what's wonderful, like that, you can still be involved and still be as excited and be a player and as if it's for the first time, even though you've been developing it and you know what it is.
For years.
Yeah, that's to me is wonderful.
Have you played through it, Lucy?
Well, I'm just happy that I didn't get sick. Like just getting in it, I was like, this is such a weird world for me to kind of fall into. It's not something that I'm used to. There's a feeling of claustrophobia at first, but then when you kind of allow yourself to let go, it's kind of like a very weird out of body experience, and I think it makes me wonder how it is for people that are not adults, let's say, like children, to play it. And it must be like a completely mind-blowing experience, right? Because it's so immersive. Yeah. There's no experience like that. It's almost like, it's a dream, but you're awake.
Yeah. And it's so exciting as well that we're telling a story in the newest form of technology, and yet it's such an old story. And I think that blend of something of stepping back in time and stepping into a period of history that you can't experience anywhere else, and experiencing it in this new and exciting
that dichotomy of the 19th century and what we have now, to be able to bring them together is kind of amazing. And funny in some ways too.
Yeah.
And this game has been in development for a lot of years now. And in that time, I'm sure VR technology itself has changed. Did that, and just working on it for so many years, evolve the game in any major ways over time?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many new headsets that are coming out. There's so much new tech that's coming out. There's hand tracking, there's eye tracking, there's haptics, there's 3D spatial, all of these things that you do have to incorporate. And you just have to be really reactive. So, you know, when eye tracking came out, we then included eye tracking as part of the game. And I think that we very much focused on the narrative and the story and the USP. And the most exciting thing about this is uncovering her history and doing that in such an immersive way. And I'm just excited to see where VR goes, to be honest, because it is developing so fast, and seeing the Apple Vision Pro come out and all of these new headsets that are going to be out soon, and you know, we're going to be using VR day to day, which is exciting.
What are you most excited to see players react to with this game?
What are you most excited to see?
I'm most excited to see people involved in something that does not necessarily mean combat to get your endorphins up. I think, you know, getting something out of this and really having the patience and the curiosity to look around and explore and take in that environment, as well as be on this journey. And you know, I'm guessing a lot of the players, as we said before, are male, and it'd be wonderful to have it come from a different perspective, even though that's the lead, you know?
I think very similarly, I'm so excited that players get to step into her shoes and embody this character who did go on to become the most powerful pirate in history. That's amazing. And the wider the audience, the better. You know, we designed this to be non-combat so that kids could play it as well, and that parents would feel comfortable letting their kids play this game and to experience her story. And I think that for me is the most rewarding part, is that, you know, more people are going to learn about Cheng-Shi and more people are going to experience this piece of history that has seemingly been forgotten.
Thank you so much,
Thank
guys,
you.
for taking the time to
Thank
talk
you so
with me.
much.